All right, welcome back in, everybody. We are getting ready for a round three matchup between Mr. T, who we just saw, and ESofDawn. Joining me for this one, Atmaz. Welcome into the cast today.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Scorch. It's a pleasure to cast with you again. And yeah, Mr. T versus ESofDawn. Mr. T has been slogging through just 3-2 matches in a row, so maximum of 5 games in each of his previous matches. And he just got back from a break and he's ready to go back into it versus none other than ESofDawn, who is possibly one of the hardest opponents in the game. So we should have a great matchup ahead of us. Mr. T representing Russia and ESofDawn from Israel. Both of these players are top caliber. You could see either of them winning this entire tournament, so should be a great match.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple spots, especially this one up in the bracket, where you look at it and go, okay, anybody who gets out of that section could realistically make a run and win this thing. Real quick, looking elsewhere on the bracket as we get into the top eight. Chehalik has already advanced past Rizo, will be in the semifinals there. The other side of the bracket, we've got Sunkichi versus Minokaro and Crisscross versus Alvar. So shaping up to be some potentially really interesting semifinals.
Yeah, and Crisscross, I'd say, is the one name there, like the one wild card, like nobody would expect. Like, look who he beat. He beat Amoeba and Rundong, so that's pretty good. And Crisscross isn't someone who's really had high finishes in the past, but he's doing very well, and he's playing against Alvar now, who is another one of the best players in the game. So I'd be very surprised if Crisscross makes it to the semifinals, but that'd be great to see.
Yeah, one of those that you mentioned where I've seen the name around before on some of the rankings, some of the leaderboards, getting close, but now kind of the first time I believe making the cut to get into a cup and taking full advantage of it.
Yeah, and if you notice Crisscross's flag, he's from somewhere near. Oh, he told me I already forget the country name, but I had to actually go and find this flag and look up this flag and put it on the bracket because I had never heard of it.
Very, very interesting. But yes, we are going to get into this one. I'm going to ready up. We'll see what the players decide to get into here. Mr. T, who of course we just saw in ESofDawn with the all Leia lineup today.
Okay, I had to look it up. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Curacao. It's an island near Aruba, but yeah, that's where Crisscross is from.
Oh,
Anyway, we're talking back to Mr.
Curacao,
T.
yeah.
Oh, Curacao. Oh, I'll have to look
It's
it up.
that's the way I've heard it pronounced because it is a type of liqueur as well because it comes from
Oh,
there, so that's how I've heard it pronounced.
today I learned. But back to Mr. T and Neosodon, who are not from Curacao. Yeah, band phase going on here, and of course, lots of Leias from ESofDawn, the variety Leia pack. Mr. T even with one. Deck covers, of course, do not indicate the full contents. What do we say here? We've seen a lot of Mr. T. I mean, we just got done watching. His green yellow sack. He's got flyers as well, correct?
Yeah, it looks like green yellow sack on both sides here, and blue very well represented as well. Both players with a mono blue deck on each side.
Yeah, two mono blue decks. One's a slightly higher in cost than the other. I assume maybe one is a Reaver deck.
That's
ESofDawn. No,
yeah, that's
no.
generally what I would look for.
So I guess as Mr. T, you're thinking, do I want to play against Reaver? Well, he's banning GY Sack, so he's decided that's not what he wants. He doesn't want, I guess, maybe a potential mirror with GY Sack or his other decks, but it looks like the mirror is not going to happen. By the way, you don't know what your opponent banned until you ban, so ended up being Mr. T's GY Sack survives. So we may see another round of GY Sack here, depending on this goes, but Mr. T does not open with it. He's going with his blue deck.
Yeah, Mr. T starting off with that blue because there are the two mono blue decks in there. This one I think would potentially be something like a blue jump. We did see Mr. T start with a blue jump in that previous series against Zorni. ESofDawn with the two blues. He's deciding to start with his mono red, however.
Mono red versus blue. Okay. I would say this matchup isn't severely favored. Either way, in general, of course, we don't know the exact cards.
Sometimes a matchup like this can come down to the red player finding some early removal, whether it's a Cypher's Wrath to pick off potentially like a Battletoads, whether it's a Firebomb has been much more prevalent in especially today, but just in the meta in general recently. If you can get one of those onto potentially like a Triton Warrior or something, you can start to take some advantage that way. But for Mr. T, actually mulliganing away, keeping that Baru in hand. So he's just going to go for, I'm playing against red. Let's start with the big boy.
And Beirut, we're talking about cards and deck matchups. Beirut is very, very good against red. If you can get the Beirut down early, it's going to be really good for him. It's probably going to be one of the first things he's working toward. And yeah, ESofDawn will have to plow through it with his with just raw stats.
Oh, now Mr. T with the decision. Picking up the Battletoads means he could reset a little bit here and go Battletoads instead of that Beru start. ESofDawn, we do see actually has a clear for Beru potentially lined up right now. Can use that Herald of War, the Bomb Slinger, and Cypher's Wrath to clear that off and take some advantage that way. But the decision for Mr. T right now is kind of a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, Beirut is generally going to be a safe play. I mean, 8 Faria, right? So for ESofDawn to clear that, in best case scenario, like you're saying, maybe it'll take 10 Faria and 3 cards, right? 2 Heralds and a Ciphers, potentially after the second Herald is buffed. So yeah, Beirut pretty safe. In any way you shake it, ESofDawn is going to have to spend a lot of resources to get rid of Beirut. So when the first creature your opponent plays is Beirut and you're red, I mean, that's just not what you want to see. You'd love to see Battletoads, something small that you can Cypher's Wrath away, but no, Beirut doesn't go away very easily.
Even playing the Battletoads there for Mr. T, or potentially if it comes down on this following turn, getting that Cypher's Wrath out of ESofDawn's hand means that Beru becomes that much more difficult to deal with as well.
And there can be only one. Well, now there's 2 legendaries on field with Cypher, so ESofDawn playing his hand out. Now, if that Cypher is somehow, well, I don't think there's any scenario where he's ever going to be able to eat Bear.
I was very, very quickly going to interject with, if you play Cypher and then your opponent plays a Cypher, does he still say there can be only one?
I've never seen it, but I wonder. Maybe I bet there's an extra file. It just says there could be only 2. But we won't see that this match. Sunken Tower here is going to allow Beru to do some shenanigans, and I think that's what he's going to go for.
Yeah, Sunken Tower is a phenomenal pickup here. Allows Beru to step up and get to that Cypher before it gets any potential of getting rolling at all. Looks like he's actually going to step between and go for the clear on the Herald of War, which is very interesting.
It does stop. I mean, once again, there's really no risk of Cypher eating Beru. And what this does is it prevents your opponent from double collecting with that Herald or doing any sort of stuff like that. So, and you can even guarantee it further with a Humbling Vision on Cypher. Now your Beru lives, but it'll take an extra Bomb Slinger to clear Beru off. And finally, ES can move on and go to the next stage of the game where there is no Beru.
Interestingly enough, ESofDawn could play Bomb Slinger and Cypher's Wrath still as a potential clear, like I mentioned on an earlier turn, and that keeps Cypher alive. But Cypher being a 2/3 just really doesn't trade into that many things, especially at the potential of then getting Cypher rolling into a bigger and bigger body. So trading him away there doesn't really lose any value, if you want to kind of say it that way. And then you keep the Cypher's Wrath for potentially picking off a Battletoads that may be set up on the far side of the board that you would never be able to get to.
Yeah, and ESofDawn with the double collection board control right now, Mr. T. The Beru is a strong presence, but once it's gone, you don't have anything else on board. He invested into that Sunken Tower instead of any sort of creatures on board, harvesters, to sit back and gather while that's going on. But now he's left with nothing, and he's going to be behind a turn on harvesting. And this is where ESofDawn is going to start swinging back. And Mr. T has to be very careful here in these next couple turns and what he decides to play and where he decides to play it. Do you go up the right? Do you take control of the right and start double harvesting, like I said, a turn behind, or do you contest the left? It's pretty hard to contest the left when there's a 4/1 Bomb Slinger, because anything you would use it with Battletoads, but if you put a Triton Warrior there, it's just going to get traded in that 4/1, and you do not want that.
Yeah, it's difficult if Mr. T is going to go for the reset and essentially the board flip here. Do you then go for Battletoads? Do you go for Triton Warrior? It kind of depends on what you think your opponent has. Battletoads is kind of the safer one because it puts 2 creatures on board and your opponent has to have 2 Cypher's Wraths, Whereas if you went for Triton Warrior, they only have to have Firebomb and then it gets cleared. So going for this play just ensures that Mr. T should have at least one creature survive here.
And he kind of went for the best of both worlds there, playing the Battletoads harvesting from the right and contesting the Bombslinger. But double Cypher's Wrath equals 2 Battletoads dead. And we are back to the previous board state we were at. And Mr. T is not harvesting again for a second turn in a row. So that's where you have to decide, like, the Battletoads is the riskier play there, right? Like, your Battletoads are more likely to be removed. Ninja Toad is great here, by the way, double harvesting and clearing the Bomb Slinger. But your Battletoads are a lot riskier play, right? They're less sticky on board. They're more likely to be removed. So if you were to keep that in mind and say, okay, well, maybe I should play my Triton Warrior, like on the right side somewhere, even though it could still be cleared with 2 Cypher's Wraths, it's a little bit less value for opponent. Not that much difference, I suppose. You'll save yourself 2 health, but interesting how that played out there. And now ESofDawn is just left with a Brigand who was shifted away from where he was standing thanks to the Sunken Tower that's now gone.
Yeah, decent uses of the Sunken Tower there from Mr. T. The first one got a decent trade for Baru. The second and the third essentially just forced ESofDawn to make lands on his turns. So you're using that in a way that it denies potentially what your opponent could do. So here, in order to collect, ESofDawn has to create a land. He can't go for potentially a draw or +1 Farius to set something else up, just forcing your opponent's use of the power wheel in a specific way. ESofDawn, however, takes advantage of that because he makes a prairie. He makes another one in the middle, which opens up potentially a Bombslinger line onto any of these lakes on the right side, which kind of backfires with Mr. T's plan because he now has to create another lake of his own in a protected position.
Right, and now we're starting to see the standoff across the pond as both sides double harvest, but ESofDawn has been ahead on harvesting for several turns in a row now. And yet, Mr. T, to begin double harvesting, still has to make lands. Like you're saying, he's a little short on lands on the right side. Left is pretty full. So, ESofDawn looked like he's going to go for basic lands this turn, which means we probably won't see anything dropped, and he's just holding on to 2 very strong creatures that he can make use of probably next turn. Bombslinger, he's looking for that Bombslinger to land on the Triton Warrior. That's why he's making those lands out there, why he's extending his reach, because he wants Bombslinger to be able to reach as many enemy tiles as possible.
Yep, just setting up potential for where the creature could come down. Now, there is one protected position. Mr. T could create a land back in behind near his ore, back in behind his own well there. But that's just, creating another land that you don't necessarily want to play around what your opponent is setting up. Not playing the Brigand there, even though you don't have a good land for it to come down, also is kind of hidden information where you're keeping another card in hand. The prairie creation there from ESofDawn is kind of telling that he has a Bombslinger in hand, but keeping that second card is just that potential of what it could be that makes Mr. T guess.
Yeah, the level these players play at, when your opponent signals like that, like he knows, when your opponent signals like that for Bombslinger positioning, it just sets something off your mind. Like, okay, I'm thinking Bombslinger right now. I'm sure that's what Mr. T is thinking about. Now, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But that is definitely in range of a Bombslinger. But I mean, what else is he going to do? I mean, he's still going to harvest. The Bombslinger is going to be played no matter what. But anyway, he can play a backup Triton Warrior. So after that Slinger, after that Warrior is destroyed by a Slinger, he can then move up and harvest. The problem is, he can deal with the Slinger with a Humbling Vision as well. Either way, though, Bombslinger is being a real hero in this matchup versus this deck because Mr. T has no way to deal with a 1 health creature other than something like Humbling Vision, but there's no low-cost card he has to remove Bombslingers, like the body that remains after it does its damage. So a really effective card versus this blue deck.
Yeah, but now with the second Warrior coming down, ESofDawn has the decision on which one to actually kill off. Can make a mountain in the open space among all these lands and kill off the Warrior at the bottom well, or he can make a mountain up above, kill the Warrior up in the top there. Either way, I think he'll probably move his Brigand over and hope that he can set up for killing off one of those with Brigand plus the Ground Shaker. It's just that Mr. T right now is just trying to ensure something survives to double collect. And actually, speaking of ESofDawn, not even going to go for that. Maybe just get aggressive with a Ground Shaker here.
He has the resources. He's been building it up over all these turns. consistently double harvesting, getting really good value trades. And I don't see any reason not to do this, really. Just use the resources you have and finish the game. It's on MrTea to respond to you. And knowing Blue's tricks, there's not too much Blue can do with this much beef on the board. Really, Humbling Visions will help, but you need the mobility, you need the debuffs, and you need to to continue to put more meat of your own meat down the board so you can fight the other meat. All right, I'm going to stop saying meat.
It's a situation here where ESofDawn is saying, okay, I'm going to start to put damage towards your orb because you're starting to come back into the game. And he's just not going to give MrTea the time necessary to actually make a full comeback here.
Yeah, the best he can do if he wants to contest or stop the orb damage, it's going to involve Humbling Vision. And yep, Sunken Tower, move the Ground Shaker over. You could have also opted to move the Triton Warrior up and then jump down and block. I wonder what's better there. Clearly he's thought it through already. I suppose this way, yeah, you remove the mountain, the enemy's mountain, right next to your orb in that really valuable Feria harvesting place. So that little highway that players like to build into their opponent's face. So yeah, I like that play there. It's the best you could do, I think.
It's kind of twofold as well, because if you're playing a creature on that space, you wouldn't have like the Herald of War be able to step over as well. So as much as it does deny, like you're saying, that mountain position directly on the well, that is a key one for this type of a deck, it also would deny potentially ESofDawn playing a creature, and then the Herald of War couldn't step anywhere and get more towards the orb. So
yeah, you're totally right. That's actually a big, a lot. That's where you would make a small mistake when playing Fairy, not realizing it, like whether to move your creature forward or to move your opponent's land. In a lot of cases, there's a very superior choice, and these players often recognize it very quickly. So now, like we're saying, humble or Bomb Slinger on the field. How do you deal with it as Blue? Well, you've got a Humbling Vision. That's pretty much all you can do, unless you want to plop down your Wave Crash Colossus, which will survive an attack from Bomb Slinger, but well, just using the Humbling Vision here. But yeah, if the Wave Crash goes down into 3 health, which it would have, there's all kinds of 3 damage tricks from Red. In fact, we saw he has a Gift of Steel in hand.
yeah, it kind of ends up being a little bit of mispositioning from MrTea there with the Sunken Tower, because otherwise the Triton Warrior would have jumped onto the space that the tower is currently on. Because he placed the tower there to be more protected, he had to jump onto a position that was then exposed to the Bomb Slinger. So ESofDawn was able to get some value that way, like we were talking about a lot earlier. And here we see again that Sunken Tower moves the lake down to deny that mountain position, like you were mentioning before.
And speaking of 3 damage, ES is full of it in his hand. Lots of Flame Bursts and a Gift of Steel to round it off. But that means he doesn't really have a great answer for anything that's going on right now. He could use 2 Flame Bursts to clear a Triton Warrior, which actually might be worth it, because you've got to consider it's probably going to result in a loss of 2 Feria for him, since he can't double harvest. And yeah, he's going to do it. So you may ask, when is it good to use 2 cards and 2 Flame Bursts to remove a 4-cost creature? Well, that's an instance where it's definitely worth it. And meanwhile, MrTea is left with just a lone Sunken Tower with just 1 health. Emperor's Command is not really going to do too much here. ESofDawn doesn't really care about how much attack his Brigands have as long as they survive. Wave Crash is just out of range. He's going to spend the last charge of that Sunken Tower to just push the Brigand up into, we'll call it the useless zone. There's really nothing it can do up there. Can't harvest. There's nothing to attack. Meanwhile, ESofDawn double harvesting on the left. That's what he's been doing all game. That's the story of this game. Wave Crash Colossus is now in range to be played, and this is going to be what MrTea puts all of his hopes in. And does he use it to defend or attack?
Yeah, because of the way that ESofDawn has been able to control the early game here, the Wave Crash still at 5 cost, hasn't even got down to that minimum of 4. And that means the past couple turns, MrTea hasn't had enough Feria to play something and the Wave Crash Colossus. And even this turn has to +1 in order to play the Commander as well.
Using the Colossus to defend, he has 2 more in deck, well, possibly 2 more in deck. But this is definitely going to put him in a spot where he can start building some sort of force to contest the left side and finally take that away. Garadan's going to make that very difficult, though. That just takes away the Gabriel Commander. Colossus is at 4. He just sweeps the board. Mr. T recognizes, look, there's just too much. Garadan takes the game, really, forces the concede, flips the board, however you want to say it. And ESofDawn up 1-0 in this best of 5.
Yeah, really nicely controlled through the early game, like I mentioned. And that situation there, as soon as the Garridan comes down in a position where Mr. T isn't immediately able to respond to it, it's pushing just too much damage to the orb before Mr. T can even get close to killing it there. So just going for the surrender, realizes he's not going to catch up when his opponent is collecting so much Faria.
And so now at this point, Mr. T is thinking, what do I want to use against this red deck? He knows the deck that ESofDawn is using. It's a combat red, mid-range red, whatever you want to call it. Mr. T has a lot in his selection that he could choose to deal with that. And as we wait for Matron to be ready, and
we just have pinged him. We'll give him a minute here, and if he doesn't come back, we'll kick him so we can continue to get this rolling. But
and for those of you watching, just as a reminder, eggs are hatching this weekend. If you don't know what eggs are, don't worry, you don't really need to know if you just log in Faria. Well, first you want to obtain an egg. So the way you do that is you watch what you're watching right now, and then you make sure your account is linked, your Faria account is linked to Twitch. There's instructions for that in the Twitch chat. Once that's done, you watch the stream for an hour, you get an egg. Okay, that's step 1. Now you start Faria. And once you get to the main menu, the main screen on Faria, you'll see an incubator button. If you click that incubator, you'll see your egg. That tells you that your egg is going to be hatching soon. When it hatches, well, it's hard to say. It's a bit random, but it will eventually hatch sometime this weekend. And when it does, you'll get a beautiful little yak buddy avatar that you can use. And the yak you get is randomly chosen as well. And we just added a new selection of about, I think, 6 or so yaks that you can possibly get. So, all right, we are jumping back into game. And ESofDawn, of course, will be locked into this mid-range red deck. And Mr. T looks like he's going to go for GY Sack.
Yeah, should be a good matchup here. Of course, earlier on we saw players bringing out the burn as the counter to Sack, although red is still very good at killing off a lot of the small creatures Sack wants to put onto the board. This type of more control list doesn't get quite as much value as the more burn styles do. That being said, there are still ground shakers, there are still Cypher's Wrath. There is a lot of ways for ESofDawn to clear off these early creatures that are going to come down and start to push his advantage.
Yeah, you have a lot of tools that a lot of other decks don't against GY Sack as red. Garadan, of course, is great. It's wonderful to deal with a bunch of small weenie tokens on the board. But yeah, Ground Shaker is excellent. Cypher's Wrath. Just really a lot of tools to deal with GY Sack. But you have to do it quickly. You can't hang around and wait, because once those giant Soul Eaters come down, that's where you're going to start having problems. Ooh, you know what else is really great is Cypher. If he's able to get an early Cypher down and just start gobbling up all these things, that's a win condition right there.
Yeah, exactly. It will go through kind of a big wave, as you mentioned, unless Mr. T can get some sacrifices going the right way for him early on in the game and get his Bone Collector snowballing, potentially get a Shaitan Assassin for a good early control trade. Then it's a big wave of control early for the red player. If they can't push up the board quick enough to end the game before the Soul Eaters come down, then, as you mentioned, those Soul Eaters are just impossible to deal with once they're anywhere, above 8 to 10 worth of stats.
Yeah, if it gets to that point, you're in a tough spot, and you're going to have to be able to close it out very quickly afterward. Meanwhile, Mr. T just setting up his board as GY Sack loves to do. Just tuck everything into your chest, sit next to your orb, harvest from both wells, let your opponent make his moves, and then react to those. So it's going to be on ESofDawn to figure out how exactly he wants to do that. He's going to go around the opposite side of the land, where the land is right now, and try and sneak in that way. But here comes Shaitan Assassin, so now he has to deal with that. But once again, red has a lot of tools.
Yeah, so we see the assassin should potentially get a bit of value here. Depends on if ESofDawn can find maybe a ground shaker. If he wants to go for the Garridan here and then wait to see if he finds something to clear that assassin off. The Bone Collector is already outside Garridan range with that one sacrifice, so potentially that can live and get a couple more rolling. So Mr. T has the pieces. It just depends if ESofDawn can find the counters here before Mr. T is able to continue to snowball.
Yep, and carefully considering the first card he's going to play is ESofDawn. He hasn't played a single card yet, still hanging on to his Explore. So yeah, I can extend his land up, make another mountain from there. He has a couple options, but all of them revolve around dealing with the Shaitan Assassin. He'd love for that to be anything but an assassin with no way to remove it. You know, it doesn't matter if you play your Axe Grinder next to the well or not, assassin still is going to destroy it in one hit. So I wonder if you just play a sacrificial Horsemaster, even just to try and save as much value as possible. Double collect with an Axe Grinder, that's out of range.
Yeah, this does set up potentially to be a sacrificial creature, as you mentioned, the Horsemaster there. Axe Grinder can be that same thing. Can create a mountain, step forward with the Axe Grinder, pop the protection bubble, and then play Garridan. Mr. T is just not going to give that chance. He's going to try to protect a little more. But this does potentially open up a Horsemaster now for ESofDawn to actually kill off the Bone Collector, though.
And that is a great play. Get rid of that Bone Collector early. That's something that's going to be out of range of your tools as red as it grows. So yeah, great Horsemaster play here. And that'll also set up for continuing to, well, starting to double harvest on the left side as he builds up more resources. 12 Fury, definitely he's in Garridan range. But yes, let's save that Garridan for one turn. Let's drop the Horsemaster.
Yeah, just realize as well, Horsemaster is 3 wild, and because ESofDawn went for that Prairie on turn 2, he
Oh,
doesn't have the lands, yeah. So he's
oh
gonna have to
gosh.
go for potentially another mountain here, and then another Axe Grinder, wait for next turn again to make the big play.
Man, you got me sold on that play so much. I
I
was in
know.
love with it, but you're totally right. 3 wild nose Horsemaster. Didn't know it used to be that way, but he's been that way for quite some time now. And the very reason Horsemaster was changed to give 3 wild is for instances like this. It's very popular in red decks and mid-range red decks and super utilitarian. But yeah, you have to bring out those 3 mountains before we can start using it. And that's going to mean one more turn where Mr. T gets to drop whatever he'd like, buff up that Bone Collector, trade a Bloom Sprite out with a Wrangler, see what he gets from that. Mr. T is right where he wants to be right now.
ESofDawn going for the draw there, initially looked kind of awkward because I thought he would just develop a mountain and then you set up for potential Horsemaster plays you can go for next turn. But as soon as he finds the Ground Shaker there, you don't actually play anything else because that means next turn can be Mountain, Ground Shaker, Garridan. And that sets up clearing off everything that Mr. T currently has on board. Mr. T, we see, has sacrificed tools, so he has to make a play here or everything is going to get wiped.
Yep, and his lands are completely full, so that means he can only play one creature, even though he has multiple creatures in hand. So yeah, it's just going to be one land and maybe something like a Bloom Sprite. I suppose he could use a Wrangler, but he'd love to actually sacrifice something so the Bone Collector gets to 5, because like you're saying, whether or not he's expecting it or not, Ground Shaker plus Garridan equals 4 damage. So if he wants something to survive, he'll need to destroy something next to the Bone Collector.
It's also kind of lined up awkward for Mr. T as well because, as you mentioned, all of his lands were covered. If he wanted to go for like the Demon Wrangler there, he didn't really have a good sacrifice target or one that would get next to the Bone Collector to get it to be rolling because it was a Shaitan Assassin and the Spirit of Rebirth next to the Bone Collector. So just ended up being a little awkward in the way that everything has moved.
Now here, order matters a lot if the Garridan play Ground Shaker happens for 16 Furia. So order matters a lot in that if you do not play Garridan first, a lot of buffs happen, a lot of extra buffs happen for the Spirit of Rebirth. You want to clear the Spirit of Rebirth on the first play and then finish everything up with a Ground Shaker. However, if you do it that way, let's see. I think that's still superior. I'm just thinking of the Bone Collector.
Yeah, if previously, like last turn, it didn't matter, I think. This turn, if you go for the Ground Shaker first, there's 2 buffs potentially go over, but this one really doesn't matter because the Bone Collector survives either way.
Yep, and there's the ground shaker. 3-2 left for Mr. T. Entire board wiped out, and this is how GY Sack is cracked. You know, they can't. They're very immobile. They're tucked next to their orb. Their lands are very packed and very dense. And if you just bust it like this, if you clear it, it's just you start. You're just able to steamroll because you're not fighting against bone collectors that are hiding against assassins that are hiding against this and that. You have a pathway forward. And Mr. T does have 10 Faria, so he can start packing things back in, but that's basically going to be, it's going to happen once. He can do that one time. Meanwhile, ESofDawn has big, beefy creatures on board that can plow through him. He can start harvesting from the right with Garridan. So this is the turning point in the game where ESofDawn can start closing it up. But it's not going to be easy.
No, Mr. T going to put a lot more value into this bone collector. Try to block everything as much as he possibly can. Potentially even go for the demon wrangler sack as well. I would think get the basically just body blockers down so that his bone collector survives. He does have the lands available now to potentially play a Solier when one comes into his hand. So he's just trying to survive as long as possible to get to that point.
Yep, and now ESofDawn is the one with the superior harvesting. Mr. T only taking one well last turn, which is not where GY Sack wants to be. Lots of tools in ESofDawn's hand, including a Horse Master, which buffs Garridan one extra charge, which is just enough to reach something like the Seed Sower. That Seed Sower, by the way, I believe came from a Bloom Sprite. Yeah, it came from
Yes, it did. This game has been phenomenal by ESofDawn to show the patience necessary to line up all of these plays. Earlier on, talking about potential Garridan line, saved that for the Garridan and Groundshaker, which was so much more impactful. Potential Horsemaster lines that could have been set up, and now he gets one that again is so much better because he can use it onto the Garridan. It's just such great patience shown by ESofDawn to set up what is now beautiful value trades. Green Yellow Sack does not have very good ways to deal with these one health remaining. Wind Soldier is going to come out for one clear, but you still have two more creatures on the board here for ESofDawn.
Just surgical precision, doing exactly what he needed to do, waiting for the exact right moment, and he just broke GY Sack. And after this, yeah, 4 Faria, and you need to not only do you need to survive, you need to find a way to start coming back and harvesting, and it's just going to be an endless assault on your orb from this point forward.
Even playing like Laya here, it potentially clears into one of these creatures, but those creatures have already killed something. So it's not really like it gains that much value. ESofDawn realistically can just step by it and Bombslinger if he wanted to, and then he doesn't even lose any of his creatures, and he'll have 4 more for Mr. T to attempt to deal with here. So
I think that's exactly what he's considering. I think he's going to step his Axe Grind. Oh, he's going to even charge in its face. Oh, he's just going to ignore and play. Okay, I thought he was going to set up for a Bomb Slinger there on Leia and just steal the win that way, but I guess this is better and this wins faster.
yep, does set up currently lethal onto this side. Axe Grinders currently have 9 damage, and the production from the Shimmering Statue will not trigger in time to save him, and saves ESofDawn again with the patience, saves the Bomb Slinger now to have to kill off the statue, which would otherwise taunt and prevent the Axe Grinder from going face. So it'll need to be another creature coming down on that forest in front of the orb here.
Yeah, I suppose also an option would be Ground Shaker would work as well, because you could use your Horse Master to do the initial 3 and do the remaining damage with the Ground Shaker. You'll have 6. But yeah, do we have lethal here? Oh, I think after those 2 creatures are played, I think it's going to take another turn or so. I think he's going with the Ground Shaker play, yep, because the Village Elder is there as well now.
Yeah, I think you even just trade the Axe Grinder into the Spirit of Rebirth. Again, correct ordering from ESofDawn, like you were saying earlier, to deny those spirit buffs. If he went Ground Shaker first, the Village Elder would die and get the 1 buff onto the Deepwood Stalker, which potentially could be a bit of value back for Mr. T, but ESofDawn, with the patience and the precision of that game, takes game number 2 and is on match point to head into the semifinals.
This is it. If ESofDawn wins this, he moves on. Too little too late from that Soul Eater for GY Sack. It was just unplayable. So MrTea made the wise decision and scooped it up and moved on. Now he's playing his yellow deck, which, if I'm correct, I think is Yellow Flyers. So that could be a really interesting match. And
Yeah,
it's
we did
interesting to
see
note,
the
well, sorry to step over there, but it's interesting to note that he chose GY Sack against that red deck. MrTea thought that, well, you would think that he's thinking that the GY Sack was a better matchup against this red deck than his Yellow Flyers would be.
Yeah, and just because we saw the Flyers in the previous series, I can see where the thinking comes from MrTea. This is a deck that features the fairies. It features Manta Riders, which can get cleared very easily by things like Garridan, like Flame Burst, like Bomb Slinger. So taking the green-yellow sack is because if you can get the Bone Collector rolling, if you can get trades with the Shaitan Assassin, basically a start similar to what MrTea had, and hold on long enough to get to your Soul Eaters, you can take that game. With this yellow deck, if he doesn't get the right start and get to out collecting your opponent, controlling the board, if you start falling behind, I think it's almost impossible for this deck to actually make a comeback.
I think those are some very good points. And I think what MrTea doesn't want to have happen is uh, lose control of the right wells. I think that's what he's going to aim for, is play his Manta Riders and just try and harvest and get to a point where he can start playing the finishers like Windstorm Champion, things like that. But yeah, I think if he just contests the creatures, I think if he just goes after the red combat creatures here, I think it's going to be a lot harder for him, because I think you will run out of steam before they do, based on the list of creatures in each deck. Like, I think after your Manta Riders are gone, I think you have your champions that are really good at contesting, but the red creatures are going to be beefier and stronger and just more of a threat. So I wonder if it isn't better to go for the double harvesting this game. But then how do you win? I don't know. MrTea clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, with these two early creatures, they are strong enough to contest what's currently on board and then have the 2/2 mantas that spit out left behind. Whereas if you go far side, there is that extra durability that if your opponent uses a Flame Burst, you have the 2/2 set up on that side. But I think what MrTea is going for is just, if he loses control onto one side, he doesn't have the ability to clear those creatures from afar in the same reach that red does. So if he goes Manta Rider off to the right and it gets Flame Burst exactly like this, and ESofDawn has the follow-up of a Cypher's Wrath, there's now those creatures gone from the right, and MrTea doesn't have any response by way of something like a Last Nightmare. There's no Choking Sand target available. He just doesn't have the same reach at actually clearing ESofDawn's creatures.
That hurt a lot, that Flame Burst. That is not the value you're looking to get out of your Manta Riders. That Underground Brigand is buffed from the attack of the Herald of War, which puts it in range of clearing the Manta Rider as well. So Soul Drain here in hand for MrTea helps him clear out the Herald, which will prevent another combat trigger from that. So that'll be nice. And there's one of those Windborn champions, but he's a couple lands away. So I think it might just be a Soul Drain play. And do you hit the Brigand in the face here? Well, you do have a follow-up Emperor's Command after theoretically the Axe Grinder runs into the Manta. You can then clear the board that way, but ESofDawn is still going to drop something else. So tough decision here. Oh, I guess you use it preemptively, and that works out safer. Yeah, because you have 2 health left after that. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't mind going for the Flash Wind if MrTea is going to use it here as well, just to get your creature out of range of the Axe Grinder. Another potential line could have been to use the Soul Pact before MrTea Soul Drained. Would have recovered back up to 20 health, had 2 extra Faria, and actually Flash Winded the Axe Grinder up a space. But doing that kept his Manta Rider within mountain range of a Bomb Slinger potentially. And here he actually moves his creature back into a more protected position, exactly like we talked about in the blue jump game of getting his creatures outside of mountain range. So really nicely done with that movement there by MrTea.
It's a smart play, and it's one that's often missed when you're playing decks like this. When you have Flash Wind, often you're focusing on Flash Wind to use it as in some kind of blowout play, to do some kind of trick that surprises your opponent. You come from behind and clear something they weren't expecting, or harvesting, or doing this. But often, a really good play to do with a card like Flash Wind is just to protect your creatures, move them out of harm's way, at least as much as you can, as much as you reasonably can, without your opponent having a trick of their own. For instance, Horse Master in this case.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, we are going to see that Horsemaster come down. So just another trade here. It's going to leave that 2/2 Manta behind. So Mr. T is going to have that collection coming for him next turn, but is starting to fall further and further behind. His only creature in hand is currently unplayable. So he'll either need to draw something or he'll need to create a land, which doesn't put any more power onto the board. So Mr. T in an awkward spot where, yeah, that Last Nightmare doesn't really accomplish a lot. Although he can Soul Pact into Last Nightmare and still create deserts to eventually get to the Windborn Champion. But if he goes for a draw, that puts his potential possible plays even further out of reach if he doesn't hit something to play.
Soul Pacting here into the Last Nightmare, it seems. Yeah, and one turn away from that Windstorm Champion, and yeah, there goes the lay with the Last Nightmare, because what else are you going to do? And Flying Manta is going to try and harvest from the right side of the board, or at least put himself in position for that horse. Next turn, Champion. Let's see, he can go to 5, then he'll go to 4. He actually can't play Champion unless he harvests next turn. Well, it doesn't matter. Goodbye for the Manta. I was going to say where you can move the Manta. But now Windborn Champion cannot be played.
Yeah, as much as I was talking about how good the movement was from Mr. T with that Manta Rider to get out of Bomb Slinger range, it does end up being a little awkward because yellow really wants to control the well angles. Basically, the way that Mr. T has developed his lands here is this space in front sets up for the spaces directly on every single well. And because all of the creatures have charge 2, you can then zip across, collect. Any movement trick means you're double collecting. Because
Now,
that Manta was in an awkward spot, it just doesn't line up for good double collection with movement tricks.
and look at this turn here. Look, because of this land positioning, ESofDawn cannot actually reach the Sunsilk Fairy with the Bomb Slinger, because he would have had to harvest to get to 5, and he would have to make the land next to the Sunsilk Fairy. And the only way you make the land is with the same creature you need to harvest from the Fairy Well there. So the land position there protecting the fairy, who also got buffed on the first draw with an event, and now it can start doing some shenanigans. But that turn was so close, and Mr. T just being completely wiped out. It was about 1 fairy difference.
Right, and now Mr. T potentially able to get some value back. He's got the fairy, which will be able to go over to collect, potentially set up for a double collection. Choking Sand is really good onto the underground boss here, and SFDawn's creatures kind of clumped off to the left side. Mr. T able to potentially start the snowball rolling.
Yeah, that's like Mr. T is so relieved that fairy survived. Now there's a lot of doors opening for him. He does have to worry about Red's removal. That's definitely always going to be a worry, but at least it has to be a fair trade uh, in this case. And Baldurian, though, in hand for ESofDawn, 2 lands away from summoning him, though. That's something he'd love to get dropped down, get that hammer swinging around. So I think we are going to see an aggressive mountain played. Not so much because he really needs that. It's more working towards Baldurian. But having a 4/4 combat creature next to Orb is nice as well. So Mr. T's options here are going to be to use that fairy to clear the Herald, which is going to trigger one of those combat abilities. Flash Wind is drawn off the top, so now he doesn't need to use Champion if he wants to move. He can actually play Champion and Flash Wind, move this fairy all around the board, harvest from the back well, and then clear a Horse Master. That's something he could do, but that doesn't make it a Herald of War.
To be honest, don't mind the Flash Wind move the fairy all the way up onto your opponent's mountain, attack the orb, and then create a desert and play the Windborn Champion up there and threaten 4 damage this turn and threaten 9 damage next turn.
Oh my gosh, I really love that. Oh, he's not going to do it because he just played the desert. I don't know if that's better or not, but I would just love to have seen that because that would have been a sweet play to watch. In this case, though, he's going for a more practical approach of just clearing off that Herald with his 4-2, which is a great value trade, tucking the champion back, keeping it available to defend about with against whatever might come out from ESofDawn. But that champion is in range of orb.
Yeah, I was just trying to do kind of the mental math on it of how Mr. T can actually set up, like, does the race work if he goes for that? Again, goes for, as you called it, more of the safer line, clears the defensive, reset up the defensive with the champion here, and then he has more movement tools in hand. He can go for the collection and still move for a clear. More protected position as well, plays around the bomb slinger that's just been sitting in ESofDawn's hand this entire game.
One relevant point is that the shimmering statue from Leia is tucked off to the left there, and it's unlikely Mr. T is going to touch that anytime soon. So that could actually be relevant if we're going to start talking about races, because it's going to take a few turns, and each turn, that one life could really matter.
Yeah, definitely. So that was where I got hung up on if he could race with the fairy champion play, just because, as you mentioned, that structure does represent a deterrent from Mr. T of actually being able to go for a clear here. And now we see Baldurian come down in a position where it's almost guaranteed to trigger next turn for ESofDawn and get that hammer. Mr. T potentially will have to go for a draw here to try to find the last nightmare.
Mm, yeah, it doesn't get it. He was definitely digging for that last nightmare. Now there's no great answer at all for Baldurian. You definitely don't want to trade your 5/5 to break protection. So I think we're going to see a fancy play here. He's got a couple flash wins in hand, but the next turn is going to hurt so much. Baldurian's going to trigger his corrupt, get the hammer in hand, likely hit the orb. You're likely looking at 9+ damage to orb next turn. Does he use flash wins on Baldurian?
It's going to go for all of the collection. So should see another flash wind here. You have to do something with the champion, just because if you don't, that hammer is probably going straight onto your champion next turn.
Yeah, and that's you got to make use of him now while you got him, because he's on borrowed time. Looks like he is going to do a little value trade here. At least if he has a choice of doing the Horse Master here, which means no harvesting next turn for Mr. T, unless he elects to move back with his Axe Grinder instead of hit face, which buys him more time. Baldurian could also move backwards as well, which means he won't hit the orb. Great play. I think Mr. T played that just about as good as he could, at least defensively, because now it's very difficult for Mr. T to do all the things he wants to do. He can only do some of the things he wants to do.
It does step that Axe Rider back, like you mentioned. That picks up the Faria, as well as going for the trade. Bomb Slinger comes down, and we see Baldurian does trigger its corruptibility, get the hammer.
And now you know. Now you know that there's a hammer of destruction in hand, and sweeping the board is Mr. T. ESofDawn sweeping the match with a 3-0 with red combat, with mid-range red, however you'd like to call it. Super powerful, super versatile deck, making it look easy.
Yeah, incredibly, actually, at this point, ESofDawn has yet to drop a game as well. 3-0 here, 3-0'd Superb Lizard in round number 2, and had a bye in round number 1 over a player not showing, or his opponent not showing up there. So he will go up against Shayholic in the semifinals, who also 3-0'd his quarterfinal match. So very interesting to see how that will play out in that semifinal.
That's going to be a great game. On the other side of the I think we're going to have Minokaro versus Crisscross. Minokaro's taking a break from Fairy for a bit, but he came just back in time, just in time for the Seasonal Cup, and he's already in the semifinals, of course. And yeah, Crisscross from, how do you pronounce it, Scorch?
From Curacao.
Curacao. Crisscross from Curacao. Oh, that's a good name. Making it, defeating Alvar. This guy. And now against Minokaro. Is he going to go all the way? He's already in the third place match. Anyway, we're going to set up the next game for you guys and go on a short break, and we'll be moving on to the semifinals next.